Hi, this lesson is going to cover Chapter 4 from the Healthy Living text, which talks about violence and abuse. Unfortunately, these are topics that we hear about all the time, and you may have experienced some of this personally or know someone who has. With that being said, there are some aspects of this chapter that might be triggering, and so if you do have any issues with anything, please feel free to reach out or either to me or to some of the services that are available on campus for you. So one of the biggest things we'll talk about, not only about violence and abuse, but how this is going to have an impact on health. So in general, as an introduction, every society tolerates some amount of force. And so some of the examples that the book gives are like playing contact sports or spanking misbehaving children, which is even debatable now. But violence is the interpersonal use of force that is not socially sanctioned. It is usually one-sided, meaning that there's a perpetrator and a victim, but it can be mutual in things like a fight. No gender or life stage is exempt. Children can be abused. Older adults can be abused. It can happen at any time during a person's life. Hate crimes are violence against certain groups of people, such as the LGBTQ plus community, ethnic groups, or religious groups. Some terms to be familiar with: assault is the intentional use of force to injure another person physically, like shoving, slapping, punching, or kicking. Abuse is taking advantage of a relationship to mistreat someone, often using frequent threats of force. So spouse abuse, interpersonal violence, which we'll talk about later, child abuse, elder abuse would all fall under this category. So how violence can affect health, it's in multiple ways. So there's the actual physical injuries from violence. That can be cuts, bruises, scrapes, lost teeth, broken bones, all the way up through gunshot wounds, stab wounds, knife injuries. Rape victims may need immediate treatment, as well as, again, people exposed to any type of violence, but here specifically to reduce the risk of sexually transmitted diseases or unintended pregnancies. So besides all the physical aspects that can happen or damage that can happen from abuse, there's also psychological damage that comes from this as well. So things like increased incidences of anxiety and depression in people who have been abused. Strained family relationships can happen because of violence. People who have experienced violence are at an increased risk of abusing drugs and alcohol, developing eating disorders, and having suicidal thoughts. So there is a large psychological component to this as well. So what causes violent behavior? This is a very complex issue. There is no one single cause of what causes violence. So there are some things that can contribute to violence, such as being exposed to violent media, substance abuse, frustration, having previous existing psychological problems, and being exposed to a lot of violence in the home or in the neighborhood. Violence can also be a learned behavior. This is obviously not the only cause of violence. There are plenty of people who have grown up being exposed to violence and are not violent themselves. But children who witness abuse between parents or between adults in their home are more likely to be violent themselves as they get older. Also seeing a lot of violence on TV and video games, it glamorizes violence to some degree. And so some kids, again, can kind of grow up thinking that's a cool thing to do. So we're going to cover 8 major types of violence and abuse, and there's a couple slides on each different type. So the first one we'll talk about is sexual violence. This is sexual activity that's committed through force, threat of force, or coercion. Rape is probably the number one thing that you would think about here. This is sexual intercourse by force or with a person incapable of legal consent. So they have to be of consenting age, which here is at least age 18. In the United States, 21.3% of women and 2.6% of men have been victims of an attempted or completed rape. So women are victims a little more often than men. Most female victims are raped by someone they know. Most male victims are raped by strangers and acquaintances. There's also marital rape, which is the use of the threat of violence against one's spouse to force sexual activity. Acquaintance rape is forced sexual activity that occurs between 2 unmarried adults, but they know each other. And date rape is forced sexual activity that occurs between two people who are dating. Reporting sexual assault. Most sexual crimes are actually underreported. Sometimes people don't report because of shame, embarrassment. They feel partially responsible, and victims may fear further victimization or negative reactions from others. They might fear that they're not believed about the sexual assault. There is a national organization called RAINN, which stands for the Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network, RAINN, which provides help and education about sexual assault. There are also other national organizations out there that can help victims of rape or sexual assault. If one is going to report, it is important to try to preserve all evidence as much as possible, get immediate medical attention, and notify the police as soon as possible. Again, there are rape crisis centers that can help with this, and if someone goes to the hospital or reports this to police, they will be put in contact with these groups to be able to provide support. There is also a chart in the chapter in your book which discusses sexual assault safety and prevention, and talks about things such as alcohol safety, what to do if someone is pressuring you, and what to do if you're a bystander or you witness some type of sexual assault. Family violence is a pattern of behavior that's characterized by physical assaults, psychological abuse, or threats between family members, intimate partners, or unrelated people who live together, which can be spousal abuse, interpersonal, interrelationship abuse, child abuse, and elder abuse. All fall under family violence usually. Intimate partner violence, this is when you're using physical or sexual violence and emotional abuse with a current or former intimate partner. This can range anywhere from slapping, shoving, punching, to beating, and even murder. And verbal and emotional abuse usually accompany the physical violence. So it's usually not just physical, and in some cases it's not even physical at all. It's more emotional and psychological abuse. Intimate partner violence, again, some contributing factors to that are being from a low-income family, being unemployed or in a low-status occupation, witnessing violence between parents as a child, using alcohol and other drugs, and having low self-esteem and being highly dependent on the intimate partner. Table 4.1 in your book lists some of the signs of danger that you should look for in a relationship. Oops, sorry. The next one is sexual harassment. This is unwelcomed or uninvited verbal or physical behavior that is sexual in nature. So things like unwelcome requests for dates that continue on, sexually offensive jokes, lewd or inappropriate comments, touching, fondling inappropriately. The person should be confronted and told to stop the behavior. If they don't, legal action can be taken. If this is happening in the workplace, there are guidelines established by the EEOC, which is the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, where legal action can be taken against those people. Stalking is another type of violence and abuse. It is willful and repeated following and harassing of another person. Most stalkers, not all, but a lot, are lonely men who are emotionally unstable and have probably been rejected by a partner. Victims experience severe emotional distress and are at risk of being physically attacked by their stalker. Table 4.2 in your book lists some typical stalking behaviors, things like repeated phone calls, including hang-ups, showing up where you are, threats being given to a person, and tracking using devices. Especially now with all the technology we have, it is quite possible to track and follow a person. Community violence occurs in public settings, such as on the street or sidewalk, at bars. In youth, this is usually seen as gang violence, usually males between the ages of 8 to 24. Gangs are going to attract adolescents whose safety, belonging, and self-identity needs are not met, and so they feel like they're being taken care of by the gang. Gang association does increase a member's risk of being murdered. Institutional violence, we'll talk about this as far as it goes with schools. Again, most acts of institutional violence are happening at schools, but this could also be workplace. It can involve the attack on peers, teachers, school administrators. There are efforts underway to help to identify and provide services for troubled youth in the schools. And youth who tend to become violent have difficulty controlling their anger, they're more impulsive, they bully others, they defy authority figures. And then this is where we get into, and it's not even really mentioned in the book a whole lot, but the talk of like school shootings has really increased over the past years. As far as violence on college campuses go, the biggest crimes that happen on college campuses are things like rape, robbery, assault, and those are most common to happen to students who live off campus. There are typically more security measures provided on campus than there are off campus, which is why they often happen there. So some of the security measures that are put on place on college campuses are things like call boxes, escort services, a lot of lighting on campus, limited visiting in residence halls, or at least tracked visiting, so that we know who's there and when. There is the Student Right to Know and Campus Security Act. It's also called the Clery Campus Security Act, which requires all college campuses to report specific acts of violence that occur on or immediately off campus. And this is a report that has to be published every year. Workplace violence is, again, specifically at workplaces. These are acts of violence directed towards individuals who are performing their jobs. Psychiatric hospitals and prisons are the most dangerous workplaces. That's where workers tend to get injured the most, and you can see where that might happen. Cab drivers, convenience store clerks, police, and security guards also have a high risk of being murdered or otherwise injured while they are working. And work-related homicides are most likely to occur during armed robbery in grocery stores, restaurants, bars, and gas stations. People who have more of a risk of becoming violent in a workplace are those who have been laid off, fired, or not promoted. They are typically men, although it can occasionally be women. They're often between the age of 25 and 40. They're loners, they have marital or other family problems, they're angry and paranoid, they may abuse alcohol and other drugs, and they often blame others for their problems, and they often blame their work for their problems. Terrorism, probably the biggest terrorist act that comes to mind when we think about that is 9/11, the attacks that happened on the United States on September 11th, 2001. Terrorism is intentional violent acts against civilians to produce fear, property damage, and numerous deaths. The major purpose is to try to frighten people, make them feel vulnerable and helpless. And the weapons that can be used for terrorism include bombs, poisonous chemicals, life-threatening infectious agents, and hijacked airplanes, as, again, we saw on 9/11. Survivors of a terrorist attack often experience PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and have a higher incidence of depression, having lived through an event like that. So assessing your risk of violence. All of these factors that are listed on these next two slides can increase a person's risk of becoming a victim of violence. So things like family disruption, separation, divorce, desertion, not having a full intact family, presence of criminal or drug-addicted parents, neighborhood conditions, high rates of unemployment or crime in a neighborhood will increase a person's exposure to violence. So social isolation and the availability of alcohol, illegal drugs, and guns. Also, a large number of children in the family or presence of children with special needs can increase the incidence of violence. Schools with poor discipline or low expectations for student performance. Being younger than 25 years, gender, women versus men, and race and ethnicity. So just to throw a few statistics out your way, women are more likely to be killed by a spouse than men. Men are 4 times more likely to die of homicide than women are. African American and Hispanics are 3.5 times more likely to be a victim of homicide versus the general population. And those aged 18 through 24 are 2.3 times more likely to be killed or be victims of homicide than the total population. The leading cause of death for Black males aged 15 through 34 is homicide. So violence is, again, it's everywhere, and it does affect some people more so than others. So some things that we can do to try to prevent and avoid violence. Improve street lighting. Again, it's easier to commit violent acts when it's dark, when it's not as visible. Neighborhood watch organizations. Surveillance by closed-circuit cameras. That's really increased in the past years. Many businesses have cameras. Many municipalities have cameras out on the streets. Even people now have their Ring doorbells that can catch things that might be happening out on the street. So there's a lot more surveillance available now than there was in previous years. Trying to avoid risky situations, avoiding unsafe places, avoiding the use of destructive responses such as angry verbal exchanges, including insults, name-calling to manage interpersonal conflicts, so using more healthy conflict resolution skills versus trying to resort to violence. Home security measures that we can all take. Keep your windows and doors locked. A lot of break-ins happen where it's easy, where they have easy access. So just being able to walk in an unlocked door or climb through an unlocked window makes it much easier. So just by locking those as soon as we enter the house can increase our safety. Use the peephole or like a Ring doorbell, something like that, to know who's at your door before you answer it. Get a dog. Even if it's the nicest dog in the world, some people are going to be afraid or not enter if they hear a dog barking in the house. And leave lights and radio on when you're away from the house. It gives the illusion that someone is there. And again, a lot of times things happen or robberies can happen out of convenience, right? They're going to pick the easy house, the one with the unlocked windows where it looks like it's empty. So these are some things you can do to try to deter anyone from getting into your home. Community security measures. Again, try to move to a safe neighborhood, right? Everyone wants to live in a nice, safe neighborhood. This isn't always feasible, but try to avoid isolated places. Don't walk, jog, or bike alone, especially at night. Try to wear a whistle, an alarm of some sort, can of pepper spray with you if you do feel threatened or if you do need to be out alone at night. Look alert. Not only look alert, but be alert. Pay attention to your surroundings and know what's going on around you. Park in a well-lit, busy area. Again, people who are isolated tend to be more targeted than people who are with groups or are going to be more easily seen. Reducing the risk of violence while you're in your car. So as soon as you get into the car, lock the doors. Totally, like, side note, it had nothing to do with violence, but I was actually sitting in my car one day after doing some grocery shopping, checking some things off a list, and it was an older lady, but tried to get in my car because she thought it was her car. Again, it was totally a mistake, and we joked about it, laughed about it, nothing bad happened, but that's something that we do. Sometimes we just sit in our car and we're finishing a text or checking on something on our phone or writing a list, and we're sitting there with it unlocked, and that's an opportunity for someone to come into our car. So as soon as you get in, lock the doors. If you're in a car accident, stay in your car, call the police, keep the doors locked and windows rolled up until they arrive. Also try to get your car out of the way of traffic if at all possible. If someone comes to take your car, give it to them. It's better for them to take your car and leave and you still be alive. Your car can be replaced. And if someone is following you, drive to the police station. Call the police, report it. Don't go home because then they'll follow you and they'll know where you live. And that could be unsafe as well. Don't get out of your car until you know you have help. As far as workplace safety measures, learn what your company's security measures are. Everywhere has them. Every company has to have a policy and procedure of what to do if there is violence. So think about fire alarms, think about safety. If you could activate the fire alarm if there's any trouble, what to do. We've all had trainings now about what to do if there's an active shooter on campus or in your school or at your workplace. So just be aware of what you should be doing. Also, just be aware of your workspace and your surroundings. Have escape plans. What would happen if there was a fire? What would happen if someone burst into this building? How would you get out? So just things to think about, not all the time, but be prepared. And self-protection. If you are ever attacked, try to attract as much attention to yourself as possible. That's why they say to carry like whistles or alarms or something with you, because again, that perpetrator is counting on you being isolated or you being alone. And if you're drawing all this attention, someone might come to your help. And then that could mean trouble for them. So also, if you can run away, get away from them. And if you need to, fight back as well. There's a lot of merit to taking self-defense classes and things like that to make sure that you keep yourself safe. And again, safety planning as well. Having plans in place to make sure that you're with groups at night and anything that you can do to try to keep yourself safe. With reporting violence, again, if a person is attacked, they have to decide whether or not they're going to report the incident to police. Also consider reporting it to an agency such as a rape crisis center that can help with dealing with legal authorities, medical establishments if you feel uncomfortable going by yourself. Anything that would happen on this college campus would involve campus security as well as a local police department. If you are a victim of violence on a college campus, you can usually get referrals through the student health center or through campus security. The college does have counseling services available to all students, and you can find out more information about that through the college's website. So to finish up, we'll talk about violence across the lifespan. Like I said, this can affect every age group from children through older adults. So child abuse or child physical abuse includes beating, squeezing, burning, cutting, suffocating, binding, or poisoning a child. Most acts of violence against children are committed by their parents or other adults in the home that they know. Children younger than 2 years are at the most risk of dying because of physical violence. Abusive parents often have unrealistic expectations about their child's behavior, or they don't know how to deal with their child's behavior. They are often under a lot of stress, and they don't have access to others who can help them. And not that that's any excuse, but that is often the situation that abusive parents find themselves in. Looking at pedophiles versus child molesters, the actual definition of a pedophile is someone who fantasizes or is sexually aroused thinking about children. A molester is someone who actually acts on this and abuses a child. Most molesters are heterosexual males who generally target 8 to 10-year-old girls who they already know. The abuser, again, is usually someone who's known and trusted. Incest is sexual abuse that's committed by a family member. And preventing sexual abuse of children involves teaching children how to recognize and report sexual abuse. Elder abuse is physical, sexual, or psychological abuse that occurs in family settings, hospitals, or nursing homes. The abusers are most likely either the caretakers for the older adults, which is often a spouse or an adult child. It can also be an outside caretaker that has been brought into the home. And situations of elder abuse need to be reported to an adult protective service agency or the police. There are some occupations that actually require those people to report any suspected child or elder abuse. I'm a physical therapist, and my occupation is one where I am a mandated reporter. So if I would ever encounter a child or an elder adult under my care and I suspect that they may be being abused, I do have to report that to the state. Some of the other occupations are teachers, doctors, pretty much anyone who works in healthcare are all considered mandated reporters. So that wraps up our lecture on violence and abuse. Again, I know it's a tough situation or a tough topic to talk about, but if you do have any questions or concerns, please feel free to reach out. Thanks.